Right, let's talk about something that's been bubbling up a bit like a forgotten pot on the stove of international politics, the recognition of Palestine. Now, this isn't exactly a brand new topic. It's been around for decades, a geopolitical Rubik's Cube that everyone's had a crack at solving, mostly by throwing it against a wall. But recently, in 2024, something shifted. A new wave of countries, a surprising little flotilla of them, decided to formally acknowledge Palestine as a state. This is happening while the situation in Gaza continues to be, to put it mildly, utterly devastating. It seems the world, or at least parts of it, is trying to send a message. This isn't just a few symbolic nods either. We're talking about a significant cluster of nations, each with its own reasons, its own history, and its own way of saying, okay, we see you. This development has predictably stirred the pot even more. For some, it's a long overdue step towards justice and a two-state solution. For others, particularly Israel, it's seen as a reward for actions they vehemently oppose and a move that complicates an already impossibly complicated peace process. It's like adding a new, very loud instrument to an orchestra that was already struggling to play in tune, or even agree on the sheet music. The timing is, of course, crucial. With the ongoing conflict and the humanitarian crisis reaching catastrophic levels, these recognitions are not happening in a vacuum. They are a direct response in many ways to the perceived stalemate and the urgent need for a political horizon. It's as if the international community, or a growing segment of it, is trying to jolt the system to say that the status quo is not just unsustainable, but actively harmful. This isn't just about lines on a map. It's about people's lives, their future, and the very idea of a just resolution. So what does this flurry of diplomatic activity actually mean? Is it a genuine turning point, a new chapter, as some are suggesting, or is it more of the same, a well-intentioned gesture that ultimately changes little on the ground? That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? We're seeing a concerted effort to push the needle, to change the narrative. And whether you agree with it or not, it's undeniably making waves. The ripples are spreading and everyone involved is bracing for what comes next, because in this region, next is always a very big question mark. So, who are these countries that decided 2024 was the year to formally recognize Palestine? It's quite a diverse group, spanning different regions and political traditions. We have Armenia, a nation with its own complex history of displacement and quest for recognition. Then there's Slovenia, a European Union member, making a clear statement from within the bloc. And they weren't alone in Europe. Ireland, Norway and Spain also stepped up, coordinating their announcements in a move that clearly aimed for greater impact. It was a significant European trio, saying, enough is enough. These European recognitions are particularly noteworthy. Norway, with its history of mediating the Oslo Accords, and Spain and Ireland, both with strong public sentiment supporting Palestinian rights, decided to act. They specifically mentioned recognizing Palestine based on pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is a clear endorsement of a specific vision for a two-state solution. Israel's reaction was swift and angry, recalling ambassadors and announcing more settlement expansions. It's the diplomatic equivalent of someone storming out of a room and slamming the door, but also promising to redecorate the room in a way the other person definitely won't like. Beyond Europe, the wave of recognition extended to the Caribbean. The Bahamas, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica and Barbados all joined the list. These island nations, many with their own histories of colonialism and struggles for self-determination, found common cause with the Palestinian quest for statehood. Their collective voice adds a different dimension to the chorus, highlighting that this isn't just a European concern, but a global one. It's a reminder that the call for Palestinian statehood resonates deeply in the global south, where memories of similar struggles are often still fresh. The reasons cited by these 9 countries vary in their specifics, but a common thread emerges: a desire to support a two-state solution, uphold international law, and respond to the escalating humanitarian crisis. For many, it's a principled stand, a belief that recognizing Palestine is a step towards peace and stability, not away from it. It's a bold move, especially for some of the European nations, as it puts them at odds with some of their larger allies. But they've clearly decided that the moral imperative, as they see it, outweighs the potential diplomatic fallout. You might be thinking, okay, a few more countries recognize Palestine, so what? Does it actually change anything on the ground? And that's a fair question. It's not like these recognitions magically erect a state or stop a single bullet. But they do matter quite a lot in the grand, often frustrating game of international relations. Firstly, each recognition chips away at the idea that Palestinian statehood is a far-off dream, something to be endlessly negotiated with no end in sight. It builds momentum and creates a sense of inevitability. Secondly, these actions significantly bolster Palestine's international standing. Think of it like getting more and more endorsements for a job application. Each one makes your case stronger. With increased recognition, Palestine gains more leverage in international forums like the United Nations. It strengthens their ability to pursue legal avenues to hold Israeli authorities accountable for actions related to the occupation and to advocate for their rights on a more equal footing. It's about changing the power dynamic, even if just incrementally, from one of petitioner to one of a recognized state, however circumscribed its current sovereignty might be. Furthermore, these recognitions put pressure on other countries, especially major Western powers, to re-evaluate their own positions. When countries like Spain, Ireland and Norway, all established democracies, make such a move, it sends a powerful signal. It challenges the long-held stance of some nations that recognition should only come at the end of a negotiated peace process with Israel. This new wave suggests that perhaps recognition can be a tool to that process rather than a reward for its completion. It's a bit like saying, maybe if we treat this as a real thing, it's more likely to become a real thing. For Israel, these recognitions are undoubtedly a diplomatic setback. They increase Israel's international isolation on this issue and fuel the narrative that its policies are alienating even traditional partners. While Israel maintains that these recognitions are counterproductive and prejudge the outcome of negotiations, the growing list of countries disagreeing is hard to ignore. It signals a growing impatience with the status quo and a desire for a paradigm shift. This isn't just background noise. It's a clear message that the world is watching and that many are no longer content to wait indefinitely for a resolution. All right, fast forward a bit. Next year, June 2025, is shaping up to be a potentially pivotal month for this whole saga. Why? Because not one, but two significant international conferences are slated to take place, both with the stated aim of pushing the Palestinian statehood issue forward. It seems the international community, or at least significant parts of it, is tired of the process for process's sake approach and wants to see some actual, tangible movement. This is like scheduling two different emergency meetings because the first one you called didn't seem urgent enough to everyone. First up, we have a rather ambitious initiative co-hosted by Saudi Arabia and France, with the backing of the United Nations. Their goal is nothing short of establishing a binding timeline for the creation of a Palestinian state. Yes, you heard that right. They're even talking about enforcement mechanisms and sanctions for non-compliance. This conference aims to craft a framework for implementing Palestinian statehood, and here's the kicker, potentially bypassing Israel's direct input in the initial framework creation. This is a bold, some might say audacious, plan to force the issue onto the front burner. The Saudi-French plan reportedly calls for a rapid, time-limited and irreversible process. The language itself is designed to convey urgency and finality. Interestingly, the proposal suggests that Israel would be required to make concessions without initially receiving recognition commitments from the Palestinians. This is a significant departure from previous frameworks where mutual recognition was often a starting point. The conference invitation also apparently attributes blame for the cycle of violence, including the October 7th attacks, to both sides, while highlighting civilian suffering and the detrimental impact of settlement activities. Strong stuff, indeed. Then, separately, but also in June 2025, there's a United Nations conference on the two-state solution. This one seems a bit more traditional in its stated objective to discuss and promote the two-state solution. Representatives from Israel, Palestine, and various international stakeholders are expected to participate. While perhaps less overtly radical than the Saudi-French initiative, its timing alongside the other conference amplifies the international focus. It's clear that after years of stagnation, there's a renewed, multi-pronged effort to revive peace talks and actually implement the long-discussed two-state solution, generally based on pre-1967 borders with mutually agreed land swaps. Section 5, Palestine on the world stage, current recognition status. So with all this new activity, where does Palestine actually stand in terms of global recognition right now in May 2025? Well, even before the 2024 wave, the numbers were pretty significant. As of late 2024, the state of Palestine was recognized by 146 out of 193 United Nations member states. That's roughly 75% of the UN. Think about that. 3/4 of the world's countries already say, yes, Palestine is a state. The Holy See, or Vatican City, also officially recognizes Palestine, adding a unique moral and historical weight to that list. This isn't just a recent phenomenon either, though the pace has picked up. The big diplomatic push at the UN happened back in 2012. That year, the UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to upgrade Palestine's status to a non-member observer state. The vote was 138 in favor, only 9 against, and 41 abstentions. This was a huge symbolic victory, granting Palestine access to various UN agencies and international treaties and allowing them to participate in General Assembly debates, even if they couldn't vote on resolutions. It was a foot in the door of the international system, a very important foot. The non-member observer state status is the same one held by the Holy See. It means Palestine can attend sessions, speak, co-sponsor resolutions, but it doesn't have a vote in the General Assembly, nor can it be a full member of the UN Security Council without further resolutions. However, this status did pave the way for Palestine to join the International Criminal Court, a move that has significant implications for potential accountability regarding actions in the occupied territories. So, while not full membership, it's a status with real teeth. The fact that 146 countries recognize Palestine demonstrates a broad international consensus on its right to statehood. The holdouts are primarily among Western nations, including most of the G7, which we'll get to. But the sheer number of recognitions provides a strong foundation for Palestinian diplomacy and its claims under international law. It means that when Palestine speaks in international forums, it does so not just as a political movement, but as a state recognized by the vast majority of the global community. This is a crucial distinction that shapes how the conflict is perceived and addressed worldwide. Section 6, a long and winding road, the history of Palestinian recognition. The quest for Palestinian recognition isn't a recent development sparked by the latest crisis. It's a long, arduous journey stretching back decades. A pivotal moment came on November 15, 1988. It was then that Yasser Arafat, the chairman of the Palestine Liberation Organization, stood before the Palestinian National Council in Algiers and proclaimed the State of Palestine with Jerusalem as its capital. This declaration was a bold move, made while the PLO was still largely considered a resistance movement by many in the West. Following Arafat's declaration, a significant number of countries, primarily from the global south and the Eastern Bloc, moved quickly to recognize the newly proclaimed state. Over 80 countries extended recognition shortly thereafter. This initial wave demonstrated strong solidarity from nations that often shared histories of anti-colonial struggle or were aligned against Western powers during the Cold War. It was a clear signal that a large part of the world was ready to acknowledge Palestinian aspirations for self-determination, even if the practical realities of statehood were still a distant prospect. Then came the 1990s and the Oslo Accords. Signed in 1993, these agreements between Israel and the PLO were hailed by many as a breakthrough, aiming for Palestinian self-determination and a permanent peace. However, they crucially did not result in the immediate establishment of a Palestinian state alongside Israel. Instead, they created the Palestinian Authority with limited self-rule in parts of the West Bank and Gaza. For many Palestinians, Oslo became a symbol of unfulfilled promises, a process that stalled and ultimately failed to deliver genuine sovereignty or end the occupation. Despite the setbacks of the Oslo process, the push for recognition continued. By 2011, almost all African countries, with the notable exceptions of Eritrea and Cameroon, had recognized Palestine, showcasing the continent's strong support. A significant European milestone occurred in 2014 when Sweden became the first Western European country to formally recognize Palestine while being an EU member. This was a brave step, challenging the prevailing consensus among its European peers and setting a precedent that other European nations, as we've seen recently, would eventually follow, albeit a decade later. Section 7, the G7 standoff awaiting the big players. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the group of 7 elephants, the G7 countries. These are, of course, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. As of right now, today, May 21st, 2025, none of these major industrialized nations formally recognize the State of Palestine. This is a pretty significant block of non-recognizers, and their collective stance carries considerable weight in international affairs. Their argument has traditionally been that recognition should be an outcome of a negotiated peace settlement between Israelis and Palestinians, not a precursor to it. This position, however, is facing increasing scrutiny, especially with some G7 members like France showing signs of a shift. While France has not yet formally recognized Palestine, it is, as we've discussed, co-leading that rather punchy initiative with Saudi Arabia for a June 2025 conference aiming to establish a binding timeline for Palestinian statehood. This is a fascinating development. It's like your friend who says they're not ready for a serious relationship but is simultaneously planning your entire wedding. It suggests a growing internal debate and perhaps a divergence of views even within this powerful group. The United States, a key Israeli ally and a permanent member of the UN Security Council with veto power, remains the most significant holdout. Successive US administrations have maintained that a Palestinian state can only emerge through direct negotiations between the parties. Any unilateral moves, including widespread international recognition, are generally viewed by Washington as unhelpful to that process. This stance has been a major factor in shaping the broader international approach, or lack thereof, to resolving the conflict. The US essentially holds the biggest pause button in this whole affair. The question is, what might it take for these G7 countries to change their minds? The recent recognitions by countries like Spain, Ireland, and Norway, all democratic allies, certainly apply pressure. Growing public opinion in many G7 nations also favors Palestinian rights and a two-state solution. If the upcoming conferences in June 2025 gain serious traction and propose a viable, internationally backed path forward, it could become increasingly difficult for the remaining G7 nations to maintain their current posture without appearing isolated or obstructive to a potential peace. The diplomatic winds might just be shifting. Section 8: Ripple Effects and Implications for Global Diplomacy. The increasing recognition of Palestine isn't just a symbolic tally, it has tangible ripple effects across the landscape of global diplomacy. One of the most significant implications is the potential for increased accountability. As more nations formally acknowledge Palestine as a state, it strengthens Palestine's legal standing to pursue claims against Israel for actions related to the occupation through international bodies like the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. This isn't just about naming and shaming, it's about leveraging international law. This shift also puts renewed and intense pressure on the moribund two-state solution. For years, the two-state solution has been the proclaimed goal of the international community, yet it has often felt more like a theoretical concept than an achievable reality. The recent recognitions, coupled with the upcoming conferences, are a clear attempt to breathe life back into this framework. They signal that a significant portion of the world is not ready to give up on it and, in fact, wants to see concrete steps towards its implementation, based generally on pre-1967 borders with East Jerusalem as Palestine's capital and mutually agreed land swaps. Moreover, this trend could subtly reconfigure alliances and diplomatic pressures. Countries recognizing Palestine, especially those in Europe, may find themselves adopting foreign policy stances that are more overtly critical of Israeli settlement expansion or actions in the occupied territories. This could lead to new diplomatic alignments and potentially create more space for a multilateral approach to peacemaking, rather than one heavily reliant on a single mediator. It diversifies the diplomatic toolkit, so to speak, bringing more voices and potentially more leverage to the table. For Israel, the implications are complex. While it dismisses these recognitions as unhelpful, the cumulative effect can lead to greater diplomatic isolation on this specific issue. It may also embolden international civil society movements such as boycott, divestment, sanctions, which advocate for pressure on Israel to comply with international law. Ultimately, the hope among proponents of recognition is that this mounting international consensus will compel all parties, including Israel, to engage more seriously in negotiations aimed at achieving a just and lasting peace. It's a diplomatic nudge that hopes to become a shove. Section 9. Keeping the hope alive, solidarity and the diplomatic dance. In the end, what all this boils down to is the enduring importance of international solidarity and persistent diplomatic engagement. The Palestinian quest for self-determination and statehood has always been deeply intertwined with global support. Events like the UN's annual International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people, observed on November 29th since 1977, serve as reminders of the long-standing international commitment, at least in principle, to Palestinian rights, including independence and a just resolution for refugees. These are not just symbolic dates, they are anchors for ongoing advocacy. The recent wave of recognitions and the upcoming conferences in June 2025 are manifestations of this solidarity taking concrete diplomatic forms. They represent a renewed push by a significant part of the international community to say that the current situation is unacceptable and that a political solution is not only necessary, but overdue. It's an attempt to shift the dynamic from one of endless conflict management to one of actual conflict resolution. This requires immense diplomatic heavy lifting, persistence and a willingness to challenge entrenched positions, which is, let's be honest, incredibly difficult. Achieving a sustainable peace in the region will require far more than just recognitions or conferences, however important they may be. It demands a genuine commitment from all sides to make painful compromises, to address core issues like borders, security, Jerusalem, and refugees. It also necessitates sustained and coordinated pressure and support from international actors to create an environment conducive to such compromises. This is a marathon, not a sprint, and one that has already been run for far too long with too little progress on the main track. The path forward is fraught with challenges, and there are no easy answers. But the recent developments do suggest a potential new chapter, one where the international community is trying to play a more assertive role in shaping the future. Whether these efforts will ultimately succeed in breaking the decades-long deadlock remains to be seen. However, they underscore a crucial point, that the pursuit of a just and lasting peace, however elusive, must continue. The alternative, a perpetual cycle of violence and despair, is simply too catastrophic to accept. Diplomacy in all its frustrating, complex glory remains the only viable way forward.